A publisher is being accused of naughty business by 2 developers. This is quite the situation. You may think, right, what actually happens when you've got a publisher and they've footed the bill for a game, or at least maybe the last 50% of a game. It's often not the full game in the indie space, especially. But what happens when they and the developer have trouble? Who wins? Does the fight just essentially get litigated in public? Perhaps yes in this case.
Seems to.
Yeah, perhaps yes. And, well, this is happening to the developers behind several very beloved games and a publisher accused of exploitative behavior. So, A Space for the Unbound is a slice of life adventure game with beautiful pixel art set in late rural 90s Indonesia. It tells a story of overcoming anxiety, depression, and the relationship between a boy and a girl with supernatural powers.
Sounds good.
Now, the thing with this, this group, Toge, is like absolutely fantastic critically acclaimed stuff in the past. Also, Muchiken, Coffee Talk, and When the Past Was Around. I actually believe one of the developers, who unfortunately has tragically died last year, had even worked with our publisher.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember when that, just when that happened. So it was kind of bad seeing like the same group, the same studio who have just went through a tragedy, now seemingly on top of that getting screwed over by by this publisher,
getting some of their money withheld for that was theirs to begin with, apparently.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
They had a playable prologue up on Steam since January 2022 with a webtoon comic and a full plan release later in 2022. But that plan has now changed, unfortunately. They had to release this statement, and to summarize the key points, PCube used diversity and nationality of the 2 Indonesian developers to gain access to a diversity grant from a major console platform. Right. I can't say what platform that is. I'm fairly sure I do actually know the grant that they're talking about. I believe it's like overall, it's like a lot of meanings of diversity and includes the diversity of the game itself. It can be the creators. But yeah, so it's like quite a broad fund that is kind of focused on getting either games from different perspectives or games that themselves feel a bit more unique and different onto that certain platform.
Games from different cultures in the way that we kind of see along indies. That the minute when you see a lot of stuff from like Southeast Asia and stuff start to become very, very apparent, even like the smaller countries, as opposed to traditionally being dominated by kind of, I guess, China and Japan in that area. You get to see a lot of those smaller countries have these because of stuff like this.
Yeah, now this is really strange. I can tell you, like, upfront what a situation with a fund like this, or a Game Pass, or just any of those, like, big chunks of money that you somehow get before your game has came out. I can tell you how those would work, like, on our side, and that is just that money would be treated as revenue for the game that would go into the revenue share waterfall, right? Like, between us and the publisher. That is, like, absolutely how it should be, right? Like, so that's the way that this should be done. But the publisher seems to have disguised the detail of this stuff and used it as a tool in order to alter their existing relationship, including on the revenue share, and this was hidden from the developer until March 2022. So the developer has now unilaterally terminated their contract with PCube Games and is demanding control of publishing their game on consoles, and they have not got that control back. They then did additionally say, hey, don't be super negative or hostile to PCube or any of the other developers of titles they've published. So, they're just saying, hey, we have been hard done by. This is, this shouldn't have happened like this. Don't go after them. Now then, of course, what happened is the industry reacted to this. Right? I mean, if you look at the story kind of top level, right? It's a British publisher exploiting a Southeast Asian development team over a diversity fund. So obviously that's something there's going to be a fairly visceral and immediate reaction to. So obviously there was a lot of support for the developers online. And also did raise some comments as to the commonality of this type of behavior in other publishers. And this is something I have continually heard about publishers acting absolutely shitty in the indie space. And the reason why they can do that and get away with that is because there's no other bloody way to get money, right? I mean, very often, just so that you understand, like, we are very lucky here because with YouTube and with NI Screen, who compared to similar agencies around the world are just incredible in how much they do support emerging projects. So we never really had this crazy accidental money thing. But for the majority of indie developers, what happens is the founders aren't paying themselves any money. They are living as cheap as they possibly can. The money that they do have is going towards, freelancers, stuff like that. So they are absolutely, they are just trying to get by on as little as humanly possible. They have a very small amount of runway. So the second that a publisher can actually come in and say, okay, you've made a vertical slice, we're going to fund the back 50% of this game's development process, because that's another thing. A lot of people think that somebody just sits down in a little business meeting in Gamescom, flips their laptop around, goes through a few slides on a pitch deck and says, so here's our game. Would you like to publish it? Would you like to fund development of this? No. Number one, you'll need a prototype. Number two, many publishers only fund alpha onwards. They actually won't fund getting to that stage.
I mean, makes sense. You've seen how some alphas look. You've seen how some alphas turn into full games, and it's not always super clean and clear, is it? Like,
and ultimately, there is a humongous supply of developers.
That's the one thing that you see as soon as you look at, like, even if you look at stuff like the Wholesome Games show stuff, and you just see, holy shit, how are there like 40 of, like, what? It's a bit disparaging to say the same game. But, like, the differences are minor in terms of aesthetic and atmosphere, and, like, sometimes gameplay. You're like, oh yeah, we're in a market where, like, everyone has ideas and some execution capacity. So the publisher's job is to be able to pick which of those is going to be worth it to bring the full way to market, or otherwise they either don't make it or let languish and be like a super small budget game.
Yeah, and, like, I know that maybe only half the people listening to this know of, like, World of Warcraft stuff because of our other channel, but a decent enough analogy would be you're a DPS, you're trying to get into a Mythic Plus group, and, you have hit the, I want to join this group for like 15 groups and just decline. All of the power is in the people with the tanks and the healers. In this situation, there's a massive oversupply of developers. There are so many people who want to make video games, and there's only so many people that have money. They end up having a lot of power, and that has allowed some indie publishers to do total bullshit. So let's go to some industry comment here. Megan Fox, who is of Skatebird, got some bad news about how many publishers do this right now. This is how most indie pubs survive. They're using title, catalog, and connections to score Game Pass, Diversity Fund, etc. deals for your game that you could have landed on your own, and calling it investment. Now, that can be done, could be done good, could be done bad. Right? I would say that an asset that a publisher has is an ongoing relationship with a platform holder that could land deals like this. The thing that just has to be right, though, is that there has to be clear and open communication between all the parties, and everyone needs to know what happens with that money. Yeah. So, like, if you get a large amount of money, what should happen is that should just go straight into your normal recoup. That's the way to do it. Yeah. So if you're, an 80-20 that then, flips the other way when there's full recoup or something, then, there's a big Game Pass deal, and you as the developer might not actually see a lot of cash in your account because of that Game Pass deal, but what will have happened is a lot of that will have went through the recoup, like normal schedule for your game, and that'll mean when launch happens and you're actually selling copies, you'll be getting a higher rate of that money because what the platform money has done as, it's rammed, it's basically repaid the cost of the publisher, so it's rammed your recoup down to the stage where it's better for the developer. So that's the sort of thing that's like normal. But publishers, so there's one of these like publishers doing, funny business with this. That's really shitty. I've also heard of publishers doing real bullshit with tax credit money. Oh, yeah. Stuff like including tax credit refunds in the budget of the game. Like I won't say who it was, but let's just say, well, you know who it was, I probably can't say, but let's just say what was said to me and Thomas was, oh no, that's straight bullshit. That money's yours, you take it. Because some other publishers have actually played bullshit with the tax recoup. So this kind of stuff happens. Here's from Matthew White, the CEO at Whitehorn Games, who is an indie publisher. Want to be clear, at Whitehorn, we give developers two options with funds and grants like this. Use it to satisfy their recoup with 0% interest, or take it as income with our regular low percent cut for brokering the deal. This is the developer's money. That's unacceptable. I mean, that latter part of the deal there is very awesome. I think what would be the normal thing, though, is just to, put it through the recoup. But those are all like totally reasonable things to do.
Yeah, I think the interesting part there is just the kind of what is a publisher doing in regards to what this kind of money from the platform is, be it I guess Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, or Epic probably would be the only four major sources of this from a platform. And it is basically being the middleman, because it's like when Megan said, that you could have landed on your own, it's definitely like difference between that you could have landed on your own, that you would have landed on your own, and that you might have landed on your own.
Big difference.
And it's somewhere in the middle of could and might, because it's like you do have to speak to the people. You have to say, oh no, this is eligible for these funds. This is like, oh no, you have to actually find the person to speak to them, all while you're trying to make a game. So publisher being a little bit middleman-y there kind of makes sense, and that's why Matthew White talks about the low percent cut for brokering the deal. It's like it's completely fair for them to take a cut because they're doing some of the work.
Totally.
But it's whenever they get into allegedly not communicating things and not being super clear about it, or funneling the money through the wrong channel to get more money for themselves.
And as for how you can make that deal yourself, well, that means hopping on a plane, going to Gamescom, going on to the meeting matchmaking system, finding the Microsoft people, getting meetings. Or doing this, any of the major, conferences that go on. Or finding somebody, somebody. Go into the smoking area at an after party. Like, actually, a lot of this comes down to soft skills and, that side of being able to hustle, I suppose. Now, as for the publisher's response to this, well, PCube have said that they've honored all obligations of their publishing agreement, that they have supported Toge Productions at every stage, offering significant future funding over and above grant funding to support development, porting, and marketing. That they have sought for some time to unilaterally enforce unreasonable revised terms to our agreement, and it is disappointing that a result of not achieving that, and despite PCube's significant effort to accommodate this, that they've chosen to go this way, and they are going to deal with shit through the appropriate channels. So they're very much saying they're being unreasonable, we've met our obligations. Now, at this stage, PCube are probably thinking, okay, it's he said versus she said. It's one of those situations. We have some deniability here. But then a second allegation comes in from Corcel, where they say they have some important news. And this is, of course, regarding PCube. So this is a developer from Thailand called Corcel. They released a statement that also made these allegations against PCube about mishandling console publication. So here is their big statement. So they said that basically, right, the console publication of Eternal Blade 2 was done with a agreement to pay a minimum quantity, a minimum guarantee. But PCube only played a small part of the minimum guarantee of the signing milestone by the time they actually sent the game over, and they never got paid the remaining milestones. Now, if you're not aware, in at least indie game development anyway, what happens is, with your publisher, you agree on milestones. And this, I'm sure, seems reasonable, right? Where basically you kind of say, okay, end of this month or whatever your period is, we'll have this done, we'll submit a build to you, we'll give you some build notes, and then your publisher will maybe take 1 or 2 weeks to validate that all that stuff is true, to have a look, give you some feedback. If you pass the milestone, bam, the money will end up making its way to your bank account. So that basically means that, yeah, game development is a marathon, not a sprint in the indie scene, because you can't start failing milestones. And the second you start sprinting, you burn yourself out, you miss your milestones. So here we have a weird situation where PCube allegedly did not pay remaining milestones. Now, they say they've been trying to resolve this issue with PCube, but that led to them terminating the publishing agreement in September 2020. But PCube then refused to return publishing control of console platforms back to them, and it actually just continues to sell and take all revenue from the game.
Yep.
Now, PCube then offered to hand over publishing control only if they agreed to keep it secret. But they just don't want to be involved with PCube anymore. So PCube evidently had a skeleton in the closet. And this situation, Toge Productions made them think, okay, Time to pull the skeleton out of the closet and everyone's going to find out.
Yeah.
So those are quite significant allegations. And as a result of this, what is interesting is that Nintendo and Sony have complied.
Yeah.
So that's a loss for PCube. But yeah, so Nintendo and Sony complied, and they have not received any revenue from European sales. They, in order to survive as a studio, had to take on additional work. That's always a tricky thing, right?
Yeah.
Because taking on additional work, that's basically saying, hey, maybe a quick educational game, maybe helping a developer with something else, and that's all fine. But ultimately, if you're a studio like them, you want to make your own IP. Because when you're making your own IP, you're building your own castle.
Yeah, that's
You're not just a mercenary getting a few quick bucks.
Yeah, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul in a sense.
Yeah, like that's why, I've made a very conscious decision that me and Thomas have made is we're not going to have our studio work and stuff that we don't own a percentage of, because ultimately we want to build something that lasts. And when we make a game, that game should be an asset that will, be good for years and years and years and years to come.
Yeah, dude,
instead of just, okay, sure, we could probably make X amount of grand per month, outsourcing to something else. But all that's doing is keeping the lights on, and then suddenly you're an agency and you're stuck in a treadmill, and that's like the ultimate hell of small business. So putting a dev into that kind of situation is basically just forcing them to tread water. So that's pretty shitty. But they say they do hope to be able to return to this game in order to patch it and improve it. So PCube then responded to them, saying that the game was released in a stage that was not commercially viable, which Corsair acknowledged and promised fixes for, that PCube remained open to providing a full guarantee for the game and also to publishing the PC version, which they claim was agreed to be provided in 2020, but they then published it themselves. Per PCube, they then spent the next 2 years in communication with Corsair, attempting to come to some sort of agreement, but these were not acknowledged. And then they claimed that rights were released back to Corsair ahead of the agreement term ending, and they remained open to supporting the developer where possible. So, in all these cases, PCube are basically saying, hey, we said we'd be reasonable, we said they'd support them. And evidently, though, there's still been issues that have made it out, to be dealt with in public. Which is a rough situation, because I think by default, everyone's going to side on the developer.
With a little guy, yeah, every time.
That's just the way it's going to shake out.
Yep.
Right? The sort of whole, it's the court of public opinion.
Yeah, and especially that always happens whenever, like, the opening salvo, whoever sends that opening salvo of, like, accusations tends to have the upper hand in the majority of cases, because, unless you can absolutely destroy whatever someone's put out, if you have to turn it from a accusations into a he said, she said, you're on the back foot by default. Because you're going, no, what they said's wrong. You're like, where's your proof? You're like, we don't have any, it's just our word. You're like, I see. Because you're already accused when you start to have to value your word. So your word's already devalued before you're allowed to say anything. And it's very interesting.
It's like it's the publisher, the ones with the money.
Oh yeah,
so there's going to be a bias against them.
Yeah, the ones with the money and the ones who are allegedly, according to Corsair, still taking their money. Like, oh yeah, nice game you've got there. We'll just take the money for it. Thank you very much. It's weird because I obviously it's impossible to pass any like real judgment outside of this is what people have said. Yeah. We can analyze it and kind of talk about like how the mechanics of this could have occurred. But it's interesting to me. I have this vibe of PCube, and it's not particularly fair. I have this vibe of PCube that there's just a little bit of they're kind of blagging their way through things, because they have managed to publish some really great games, both on their Asia branch. It publishes like Asian games, and their indie branch it publishes indie stuff. Done excellent work across the board, but there's also sometimes they clearly kind of phone it in, it seems, in terms of their entire like marketing approach. And maybe that's just because the developer doesn't want the full, hey, give us a physical limited edition, give us a marketing package, because PCube are like the reason like Arc System Works games are popular in Europe, or at least made their way to Europe in the first place. There's like Steins Gate exploded in Europe largely because of them. It's like they clearly like have at least a solid core that does a great job, especially when you've published so many games and there's only a couple of people who are like complaining about it. You would imagine maybe something's gone wrong. Maybe they aren't like inherently evil. Perhaps there was mistakes made, and then they're kind of covering them up, or not covering them up, but like kind of trying to insist they're in the right, even though maybe like it was a miscommunication issue or something. But at the same time, it does look real bad, and you're sitting like, well, turns out it's not all easy whenever humans are involved at every step of the process. There are mistakes. People do things that are just wrong. Sometimes mistakes, sometimes malice. Hard to say which is which, but it is particularly unfortunate in this case because you hate to hear it, honestly. You hate to hear it. For devs and publishers, you're like, why can't everything be smooth and we get great games that like everyone gets the money for? Why is it not just nice? Sad.
I think that's why for so many developers the big goal they want to hit is being able to
self-sufficiency,
to self-publish, and to be able to self-publish and actually have visibility on a game. That's that's the hard bit.
Yeah, it's like a pick two or pick one of two. Self-sustainability or actual success.
Yeah, because like that way you could end up selling half the games and make double the profit, or double the revenue at least, you know. So it's tricky. The people who hold the money certainly do have a lot of power, and that means it's up to them how they actually wield that power, and hopefully not get themselves into bizarre, more just bizarre situations like this. I mean, another example of this, of course, is with the Ukrainian studio Frogwares.
Oh yeah,
and this is this is an older story, but a whole big series of events led to them accusing Nacon, their publisher, of actually uploading a pirated version of their game to Steam. So, things obviously broke down between the two of them. The publisher basically goes, yeah, well, screw you guys. We pirated a copy of your game anyway. We'll publish that and make money from that. So then Frogwares had to DMCA the Steam page of their own game, which was a pirated version that was being sold to people. And that's led to, that's been happening while there's been a long-running court battle that's continuing to determine whether Nacon has got the right to publish the game that Frogwares has attempted, to cancel their publishing contract for. That's mad. And then there's another one with Nacon as well, actually, suing the IP holders for RPG Paranoia, Happiness is Mandatory, based on allegations that they DMCA'd the game from the Epic Game Store after Nacon published the game there in a less than satisfactory state and without their approval, which again resulted in the game being pulled from sale. It'd be like if I just woke up one morning and was like, Thomas, why is it...
Beyond's done.
Our game's not done. Why is it on Epic? And what's happened? Which would be a totally insane thing to have go on.
Yeah, imagine
the court case from that, by the way, is that whole case is still ongoing. So, yeah, look, we're not going to see a resolution for quite some time.
Yep. But
this is, I think, a situation that brings to mind the power imbalance. And it brings to mind that indie publishing can be, honestly, a bit of a shit show. Quite a lot of devs definitely have stories.
Yeah. Please support independent game developers. They're the ones making games that actually matter to these days. So please support them so they don't end up in situations where they're like, sorry, our publisher stole our game. Or sorry, we can't release our game on consoles because the publisher says no. Even though it's done and we're just fighting over it. Please support them.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want developers to have to put in de novo to prevent their publisher from publishing a cracked version of their own game.
Oh, Jesus.
All right. So on that fun little finisher, hope you found this interesting. If you're an indie dev who's had an experience with a publisher, let us know your story. It's always interesting to know. But other than that, hey, thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time.